Welcome to Inside Personal Growth Podcast. Deep dive with us as we unlock the secrets to personal development, empowering you to thrive. Here, growth isn't just a goal, it's a journey. Tune in, transform, and take your life to the next level by listening to just one of our podcasts. Well, welcome back to Inside Personal Growth for another amazing episode of Inside Personal Growth. With Jeff Wetzler, and Jeff is joining us from upstate New York. Is that right, Jeff?
Hudson Valley, New York, yes.
Hudson Valley. Well, Hudson Valley, I've been watching a show about remodels, I told him. And if you guys get a chance to watch that show, I don't know the name, but just look it up on HGTV. These two girls do remodel. Hudson Valley is the most beautiful spot that I'd seen in a long time. This is the book, though. We're going to ask about Hudson Valley. The book is called Ask, Tap into the Hidden Wisdom of the People Around You for Unexpected Breakthroughs in Leadership and Life. Well, you've been doing this for a long time, Jeff, and you understand this exceptionally well, better than anybody. And I want to let my listeners know that the actual website that you want to go to learn more about this is askapproach.com.
Yes.
Askapproach.com. There you can order the book, but we're also going to have a link to Amazon, which seems to be the preferred place where most people go to get books these days.
That's right.
And is this also an Audible book too?
It is also on Audible and Kindle as well.
Okay. So it's an Audible book, but I'm going to let the listeners know a tad bit about you, Jeff. Jeff Wetzler has been in a quarter-century quest to transform learning opportunities and unblock human potential, blending a unique set of leadership experiences in the field of business and education. He's pursued this quest as an international management consultant to executives in Fortune 500 corporations, as a chief learning officer at Tech for America, and currently as the co-CEO of Transcend, a nationally recognized innovation organization. Jeff earned a doctorate in adult learning and leadership from Columbia University and a bachelor's in psychology from Brown University. He is an Aspen Globe Leadership Fellow and an Edmund Hillary Fellow, and he lives in New York with his wife and two children. And don't forget the most important thing, the puppy.
Yeah.
So again, go to askapproach.com. It's the little things in life, like the puppy, Jeff, that make a difference. Here's the book, folks. And believe me, the puppies do make a difference.
The puppy was my reading companion the entire time when I wrote the book. You know, every late nights on the couch, early mornings, weekends. That's who was sitting side by side with me.
Yeah, and you were probably asking the dog questions and you were getting answers.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to write Ask, and how did your own experiences shape kind of the concepts in the book, Jeff?
Yeah, so I would say what inspired me was two things. One is the problem that the book is dealing with is a problem that I think is pervasive, and it's a problem that I have faced many times in my own life as a leader and as a person. And also, I've been very fortunate in my life and career to have a set of mentors and teachers who have shared with me various tools and ideas for overcoming this problem. And those tools and ideas have been so powerful in my own leadership and have been the very first thing I go to when I develop the people around me. That at a certain point a few years ago, I said, I think it's time to pay it forward. I want to pass this on to more people so they can benefit from the gifts that I've been given too.
Well, you really have. And I think that when you say the unexpected breakthroughs in leadership and life, asking questions is an art and a science. And it's also this, as I mentioned to you before we actually came on the air, it's this kind of feeling what your heart feels, right? As a podcaster, every day, I kind of have to look through the screen of Zoom and try and feel what the person on the other end is. Now, in the distance like this, it's not as easy if you and I were sitting in a studio.
That's
and
right.
I could see Jeff. But in your book, you talk about the phenomenon of the unspoken.
Yeah.
Can you share an example from your career where something unspoken had significant consequences? Because this is one that you try to get from people, even on a podcast, what's the unspoken?
Yeah. And, when I was saying my two reasons for writing the book, the first one was the problem that's pervasive, and that problem is the unspoken. The problem is that the people around us in our lives, that could be our coworkers, our bosses, people we manage, friends, clients, investors,
Our kids,
our partner, our spouse, our partners, anyone, they have ideas and insights and perspectives and observations that are so valuable. The problem is that too often we don't find out what they are, or we don't find out some of the most important things that they are thinking and feeling. If we could find them out, we would make better decisions. We would save time. We would avoid mistakes. We'd innovate better. We'd have closer relationships, but we just don't find it out. And so to your question, an example in my own life and career, when I was early as an operating leader, was managing a few hundred people, we were overseeing major training events. And these were very high stakes, high visibility, hundreds of people being trained that would affect, thousands and thousands more. And one of them was about to implode right before it was going to launch. And we spent a year, preparing each one of these things. And one of them was literally just not going to work out in a pretty spectacularly, public, visible way. And I discovered that, just at the very last second, almost too late. Thankfully, a leader on my team stepped up and did a heroic job to get it back on track. But all throughout the year, I was checking in with the team. I was saying to the team, "How's it going? Everything on track? What's going on? What can I help?" And all I would get back was, yeah, a few little bumps, but we got it. And I'm thinking, okay, all right, they got it. And what was really going on is the whole thing was falling apart. They knew it, but they didn't want to tell me. And some of it was I wasn't asking the right questions. Like a question, for example, like everything on track is not a good question to be asking your team if you really want to find out what's going on. Yeah. And some of it was that they didn't feel safe to tell me the answers. Even though I genuinely, in my heart, I was curious and I wanted to know, they were worried that if they told me how bad things were, they would look bad. I would be upset. I might fire them. I might punish them. And really at the end of the day, it was on me as a leader because I didn't create the context of psychological safety for them to actually tell me what the challenges were, which is too bad because I could have helped them and I would have helped them. And I wouldn't have just said, "Oh, you're terrible." I would have actually gotten in there, rolled up my sleeves and tried to figure out what to do. But I didn't find out until too late.
Well, the interesting thing you say there, Jeff, is that, frequently you have, as a leader, you have to learn how to reframe questions. Mm-hmm. It's how you actually paraphrase the question that actually begets the result that you need. Now, you talked about this barriers to sharing, right? It's like, okay, if I'm going to ask this question, are you going to be willing to share? And you identify several barriers that prevent people from sharing, like in your case, that was a great example. Which barrier do you find the most challenging to overcome and why as a barrier to sharing?
Yeah, so maybe just to quickly go through some of the barriers, then I can say which one. I mean, one of the biggest barriers is fear. People are afraid, just like I shared in my story, people are afraid that they're going to look bad, you're going to get upset, you're going to take it out on them, or maybe it's going to create tension in your relationship.
Right.
I think my answer probably would be that would be the biggest barrier. I'm happy to share the other ones if you want, but this barrier of fear of the impact of saying something is very, very strong in people.
And so if you're a leader and you feel that this is the biggest one, I mean, people can read the book and get the others, but let's address this big one, right? Yeah. Fear. Fear has always been said, false expectation appearing real. And it's because they believe there's some kind of retribution as a result of being able to share something that might be negative. What would you tell our management people out there today that are working in teams or working as leaders to remove that, what I want to call aura or umbrella of having fear? I know, I'll share a story with you from an author many moons ago, but the reality is it was true. In hospitals, nurses didn't want to share, doctors didn't used to want to share when bad things happened. So they had a hard time doing improvement, right? We're talking about process improvement and improving things because they were afraid from the management of the liability associated with a mistake that might have been made with a patient. Okay.
Totally.
So you can imagine the barrier to actually being truthful was huge in that example because someone's life was on the line. Oh,
Exactly.
I forgot to put in the IV tube, so the person died, right? It's like, and we know that happened. And hospitals were able to overcome that huge fear. Now, I tell that story because it's probably a really, really good example in group settings where you have doctors, nurses, everybody trying to come together to overcome something. Share with us how you might help people actually approach that.
Yeah. And so this is part of the ask approach that I talk about called make it safe. And this is really about making it feel more comfortable, easier, safer, more appealing for people to tell you their truth, especially if it's a hard truth. And there's a couple things that leaders can do to make it safe. First is creating connection. And I like to say, the time to create connection with somebody is not right when you need to learn from them. The time to create connection with them is days, weeks, months, years in advance. You got to dig your well before you're thirsty. But to the extent that people have a real relationship with you, and they see your humanity, and they know that you can see their humanity, and you feel a level of connectedness with people, that alone creates a level of safety. Because a lot of times the people make up stories about a leader in their head. They say, well, this leader only cares about this. They would never care about whatever. But if they know you, then they know you in your full glory, including all your warts and all your own struggles and all the things that are important to share when you're trying to create connection with someone. So that's a piece of it. The other part about creating connection is even just the time and place and space of the connection. If if you're trying to have a conversation and connect with them, and that there's only 5 minutes to go, or if it's in a public place and they're not comfortable sort of really opening up in that public place, or if they're just not comfortable, it's a very intimidating place. But it's gonna feel less safe for them. So the thing about creating connection is to do it on their turf and on their terms, not where you want to feel comfortable, but where they're going to feel more comfortable. So that's all one bundle of things. A second thing,
but it's great advice, and I would say, I would ask you this. This is a compound question to the first one while you're still answering it, but I think it's valuable. Jeff, we live in a society today, and it doesn't matter if it's just the United States or it's Mexico or it's European countries, it's Germany, it's kind of the great divide. We have so many leaders that don't want to tell the truth. Okay? Now, I don't expect you to have an answer to this, but you just said connection. If Donald Trump, if you're listening, let's open up the connection and tell the truth. I think the truth is so much more engaging. It's something that allows to clear the energy, which is heavy in a room, right? To actually do that. Now, I know lawyers defend people who don't tell the truth all the time. That's what they get paid to do, right? It's their job. It's unfortunate, but it is. So I know I kind of digressed a bit, but I digress for an important reason. The important reason is we have listeners out there that know this is happening. It's happening inside their companies. It's happening wherever. What, from your expertise, would you say to break through to actually be able to get the truth out of people?
Yeah. I think that you're pointing to a really important phenomenon, which is that the lack of feeling of safety goes in both directions. Oftentimes, we were just talking about how leaders and myself as a manager can create the feeling of unsafety among their followers. But what doesn't get talked about enough, I think, is that often leaders themselves don't feel safe to say their truth to their teams, to their organizations, to their stakeholders.
Very good
and
point.
So if you want a leader to tell the truth, a leader in your life, you need to also ask the question, how do you demonstrate to that leader that it's safe to tell the truth with you? And of course, leaders should tell the truth no matter what, but they're humans too. And so the safer they feel to tell the truth, the more likely they're going to, they're going to do that.
And I love what you said, because that is probably the most. I think that the people that are at the top feel unsafe as well. Yeah. And I mean, I think if people can get that, we can bridge this huge divide. that has
Totally.
occurred as a result of it, and on that, and a little compassion, even if the truth hurts.
I would
A
love
lot
to
of
see,
compassion if the
yeah,
truth hurts.
exactly. And I would love to see more leaders, whether political leaders or organizational leaders, say to their followers, let me tell you the dilemma I'm facing right now. I know you want to
Right.
hear this from me. If I do this, here's what's going to happen. And if I do this, here's what I'm worried is going to happen. And here's how I'm caught. And let me tell you how I'm navigating it. And so here's where I'm coming down on this issue. But you need to see the ways in which it's complex for me too. I think those kinds of moves on the part of a leader are ways to tell the truth that generate empathy on the part of followers, and can make it easier for leaders to, to navigate those tough situations.
Yeah, and I really know this for a truth. No matter if somebody's elevated through the ranks to a leader or got elected as a leader, whatever they did to become a leader, there's a lot of power and trust that goes into that. The way to keep that trust is to inform all the constituents that are around you of the issues, just like you said. And if you can feel safe doing that, you should, simply because it's the way that you will harmonize the rest of the work you're doing. Now, you say curiosity mindset. How would you foster a culture of curiosity in their organizations, and what are tangible benefits of doing so? Because this is one of the areas where asking questions requires curiosity.
Yeah,
Asking the right questions, if you're not curious, you're basically dead in the water.
I
Uh,
totally agree. Yeah.
yeah, the reason my show is what it is because I don't think you could have find a more curious person than I am to
Mm.
try and find, I wouldn't say find solutions all the time, but get in engaging dialogue and conversations that lead to possible solutions.
And that's what it comes down to. I mean, I think that that you mentioned earlier that if you have the curiosity in your heart, the questions will come naturally. And I think that when I learned the Latin root of the word curious, I don't know if you know it or not, but it's care. And so curiosity really is about caring about someone else and caring for someone else, which I think does come from the heart. And I'm talking about a particular kind of curiosity in this book, which is not necessarily the kind of curiosity of like, I'm curious to know the history of Russia, or how does AI work, or why do trees grow the way they do. But it's called connective curiosity. It's, I'm curious to know about you and what you think and what you feel and what experiences you have and what your stories are, and how you're experiencing our relationship. And that kind of curiosity is a curiosity that connects us to each other as well. I think it's a kind of curiosity.
I think that
Yes.
statement, Jeff, sorry,
Yeah,
people don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care.
that's
Now,
right.
that may sound silly, and we've all heard it, but the reality to that statement is so true in all of life. I don't care if it's the waiter or waitress that's waiting on you at the table, it's how you treat them that makes a difference. It's whether you recognize their name and you use their name in a sentence. They say our name is one of the most beautiful things we love to hear. So the point is whatever you can do to shift the energy and move it to a commonality versus a superior over an inferior. Okay. I don't care if you bag my groceries. I'm not superior over you. I don't care if you sweep my floors. I'm not superior over you. We're human beings. We put our pants on the same way in the morning. We do the same things we've got to do every day.
Absolutely. And I think that, I believe that there is something important and interesting that we can learn from every single person, no matter who they are, no matter what role they're in, no matter whether we are on the quote same side of some issue, or not from them. And I think that that's an expression of the care that we have. I care enough that I really want to learn from you. So back to your question of how do we cultivate that kind of curiosity?
Right.
Part of it is we cultivate it in ourselves. And I talk about that this kind of curiosity is a choice we can make. It's not just a trait that some people have and other people don't have. It's not just a state of mind that I happen to be waking up feeling curious or not curious. It is a decision that I believe is always available to us. And when we make the decision to choose curiosity, we're really centering in our minds one question in our hearts: what can I learn from this person? And when we center that question, what can I learn from this person? I find that it pushes out other questions. It pushes out questions like, what can I tell this person? Or how can I show them I'm right? Or how can I look smart? Or how can I get them to do what I want them to do? Or how can I get out of here? All that stuff starts to fade away when we're really centered on the intention of what can I learn from this person? And then all of a sudden, other interesting questions start to fill up. Like, what do they know? What experiences have they had? What's their life been like? What do they see that I don't see? How are they experiencing us and our relationship and me? And so all kinds of things just start to naturally come to mind, to your point about once you have that question centered, lots and lots of questions spring forth from it. Now, you also have,
in essence, this is kind of a think tank, right? This is my think tank over the internet through Zoom calls with people.
Yeah.
And I think, in a think tank, it's really the quality of the questions. So in your case, could you share some examples of high impact questions that can unlock the hidden wisdom within a team or an organization? Because if this is our think tank right here, Jeff, you and I, then why not share with every thousands of listeners that come to this show what you and I could create in this think tank and the quality questions that we could tell, or at least impart the wisdom on, that might work.
Absolutely. And you are, I think, modeling that right now, because you are eliciting from me something to offer to your listeners as well. And that's basically the point of asking questions, which is how do we elicit the insights from other people? So I distinguish between quality questions and crummy questions. And my definition of a quality question is simply a question that helps us learn something important from the other person, from someone else. And it's deceptively simple, because a lot of the things that we think are questions, I would call crummy questions. Some of them are just clumsy. So for example, sometimes people will say, here's what I think, blah, blah, blah. Isn't that right? Or they just say right at the end. And technically that's a question. They might even be interested in knowing, does the other person agree? But it's very difficult for the other person to say anything other than nod their head and say, yeah, that's right. You'd have to kind of, be an idiot to say no to something that's, obviously right. So there's questions like that. There's sneaky questions where we're really trying to sort of manipulate people to get to do something. People weaponize questions and use them as attacks. So all of those are crummy questions. Quality questions just let us learn something. So I'll give you a couple examples if you want of quality questions. One of my favorite ones is just a strategy that I call request reactions. And what that means is that I tell you what I think, or I tell you my point of view, or I give you some feedback or give you some direction. And then I pause for a second and I just simply say, hey, Greg, what's your reaction to that? How does that strike you? How does that sit with you? How does that land with you? What does that make you think? What might I be overlooking? Any version of that is essentially a question that is inviting you to share with me your reaction, your opinion, your thinking on my own thinking. And I think we often don't ask that question because we assume that if somebody has a reaction, they're going to tell us. But for all the reasons we talked about earlier, in terms of the lack of safety, if someone disagrees with us or just doesn't quite resonate, or they have slight intuition that that plan we just talked about isn't going to quite work, we stand a far greater chance of hearing that if we actually explicitly pause and invite their reactions. I'll pause for you for a second and invite your reaction to that. Yeah.
Well, again, for someone who asks a lot of questions, and that's my rule, is to facilitate a dialogue with an individual. There are important pauses that allow one to take in the information and then either transform it, not just waiting to ask the next question. That I don't believe is so right, but I do sometimes catch myself there. What I attempt to do is stop when I do realize that I'm there and reframe the question based upon the data that I think I heard. So frequently, I don't always hear it right, but sometimes, and never in a podcast interview, but in other places, I will say, is this what I heard you say?
Yes.
Now,
yes.
I know that in our case with this interview today, it isn't about me repeating me saying, I think this is what I heard you say. Although maybe I should start using it more. You've brought it up. And it might be a great way to have you reframe it so if I didn't hear it right, maybe my listeners didn't hear it right either, right?
Yes.
So
I call that strategy paraphrase and test. And
Yeah.
it is, it is one of the most powerful and simple things that we can do. Sometimes people say to me, if someone could take away one thing from this interview or from your book or whatever, it's just one simple thing, I would say paraphrase and test. When someone is talking to you, just say to them, let me just check. Here's what I think I heard you say.
Right.
Did I get that right? Or what did I miss?
Right.
And it has so many benefits. I mean, I'll tell you, when I say that, when I try that strategy, at least 50% of the time, someone will come back and say, you didn't quite get it right. Or you missed this important nuance. Or, yeah, you got it right, but now that you're saying it back to me, there's something else I want to tell you too. And so it makes sure that we hear what's most important from the other person, that we heard it right. But it does two other things that I think have a magical benefit as well. One is it just slows down the conversation.
Yeah.
And so especially if you're in the heat of the moment, you're ping-ponging back and forth as a point counterpoint. When they make their next point, instead of just coming back at them, if we go to them and say, wait, I just want to check, did I get that right? It changes everything about the energy, the tone, the speed of the conversation. And those are the moments when we do need to slow down, when we do need to actually take a beat. And so it's a very natural way to do that.
I concur with you. What I would also say is that, in the design of a podcast, there are people like Joe Rogan that just riff for 2 hours.
Yeah.
They'll just riff. It's just that's all you're doing. Versus a podcast show like this, and my listeners know, I try to get in the 45 minutes, a pretty good summation of one's book, so that the people could say, well, this is something I could use or not use. So in my case, I'm not making an excuse for why I don't riff, but I don't riff a lot on this show, meaning like, hey, just Jeff and I are just going to go off on some crazy tangent somewhere. Although I will say, in a business environment, sometimes it's really good to just riff.
Totally. You never know where that's going to lead.
You never know where that's going to go, but I think for my listeners, they understand. So look, you've discussed the importance of listening and truly understanding, and then reframing the question like I just did. Is that what I heard you say? I think that was awesome. I think if that's all they took away from this, it'd be great. How can listeners, or how can leaders ensure that the insights kind of gained from asking the right questions are effectively turned into actionable strategies? Now, here's just an as important one, right? It's like, okay, you get all these great questions, but then you don't take any action after you finish this hour-long meeting. And I don't know if you're like me, meetings constitute most of your day, right? It's like, my God, can I do another meeting? And then when you look at what gets transcribed for you in Otter AI, and it says, well, here's the action steps. And you go, holy shit, if I did all those action steps, I'd never get done. So you get where I'm coming from, right?
I totally do. Yeah. Once we've posed the question and heard the answer, that doesn't guarantee we're going to learn or change anything. And so this is where the final part of the ask approach comes in. I call it reflect and reconnect. And reflection is really what allows us to convert experience into insight and insight into action. That's how we actually squeeze.
Can you repeat that? I want you to repeat it for the listeners.
Reflection is what allows us to convert experiences into insight and insights into action.
Okay.
We don't always reflect. I think sometimes reflection gets a bad rap. People think, I don't have time to reflect. Right. I got to go on some kind of meditation retreat on a mountain to reflect. But reflection can be simple. It can be practical. It can be fast. And so I introduce a method for reflection that I call sift it and turn it. So sift it is just to say, all right, maybe there were 30 things that got discussed in the meeting. Maybe someone told me 30 things. What are the 3 most important things? Let me sift out the other things and just zero in. That could be looking over the transcript. That could be looking over our notes. That could be just thinking through and sort of saying, really, what was the most important thing that I was told in this conversation? Sometimes I encourage people to get a friend or a colleague or a coach to help them sift it, because sometimes we don't want to accidentally sift out the wrong stuff. But if we can get it down to like, here are the 3 nuggets that I got from somebody, the 3 most important things, then we turn it. And turn it just means turning it over in our minds in a structured way 3 times. So the first turn is what I call turning it over for our story, or story level reflection. And that's basically saying, how did what I hear help me update my story about this person? about this situation, about myself. My beliefs about this particular situation or issue are getting to updated. The second one is steps. So based on that revised story, what steps should I take? Maybe I should invest further here. Maybe I should apologize. Maybe I should take a left turn. But really, naming what steps we should take. And then the last one is the deepest one, and it's called stuff. It's reflecting on our stuff. What did I hear that might give me a little insight into a bias that I have, or a way of being that I have, or how I show up in the world, or a deeply held assumption? That is a deeper, sometimes more painful kind of insight to get, but that's the most important insight to get, because we bring our stuff to every single situation. And so if we can reflect and say, I learned something here about assumption I'm making, that is some of the most enduring learning that we can do. So just to sum it up, it's a sift it and turn it. Make those 3 turns: story, steps, stuff. And then I call this reflect and reconnect, because this is not just about a one-way extraction of learning for ourselves. This is mutual, which means this is about closing the loop with the other person. It's about going back to the other person and saying, thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for taking a risk if that felt hard to share. And I want to tell you what I'm learning from you. Here's how what you have shared with me is changing me. I'm growing from you, and here's what I'm going to do about it. That's the reconnect part. And I think it is very rare in organizations and in our society for someone to get that kind of reconnection, for someone to actually feel like, wow, I made a difference, such a difference that they really acknowledged me for it and told me what they learned from me. And you can go further and say, by the way, is there anything more you were hoping I would learn from you, or anything more you think I could be taking away from our conversation? And that gives the other person a chance to also help revise what you're taking away. And it has a profound impact on the other person. It lets the other person know they didn't waste their time. It shows them how powerful they are, how much you value them. I think it really also increases the chances they're going to want to share in the future as well, because they know how much it meant to you.
And what comes up for me is, you've created a dialogue, not a conversation, and I can define the differences, but that's where inclusion has been brought into the picture, where when people say, well, we're going to make this decision, well, we didn't actually include some of the team members in the decision-making process. And then we wondered why that project, like you just said, didn't get done. One was because there wasn't trust, and 2, possibly because there wasn't the kind of inclusion that needed to be in that, for someone to say, well, I had a say so. No, Jeff just told me this is what we're supposed to do. Well, I don't agree that this is what we're supposed to do. So it's now going to go all the way down on the list of priority of things that need to be accomplished. So you can look at this as a heartfelt inclusion, where people are listening with a heartfelt approach, applying their compassion and understanding to each other, and then blossoming into something that is aligned together to move there. I know that's a lot of words, but when you really look at it, it's pretty simple. It's like I tell people when they listen to one of my podcasts, what I'm attempting to create is if you and I, Jeff, were sitting in a movie, watching a movie, and I was sitting next to you with a bag of popcorn and you had your favorite drink or whatever, and I turned to you and I said, Jeff, what'd you think of the movie? And you and I had a conversation, dialogue, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it conversation, but heartfelt about, that's the best movie I ever saw, dude. I really appreciated it. So I try and create this atmosphere that allows people the freedom where you're a best friend, where Jeff is the best friend. Jeff is the one in the movie theater that we're asking the questions of, and Jeff is going, yes, here it is. And I think if I can convey that through one of my podcasts, I have more listeners. I have people that'll hang in there.
It's beautiful. It resonates, and I feel that on my end of it. And I think that is a good way of looking at the situation that we want to try to create in as many relationships as possible. The more that leaders can create that sense of comfort and safety for the people around them, the more likely they're going to have a good conversation. It's going to be interesting, and both people are going to learn from it.
And I would say to leaders who are listening, I know you're all busy, and I know you've got an agenda and a schedule, And I know you have a hard time taking this time because you're living in a linear world. If you'd remove yourself from the linear world and open up to the possibilities of being here now. I have this little thing on my desk, right? And I actually have a clock that I would show you.
Yes, be here now.
Right. So the key is to be present with people. So with that being said, what, Jeff, for this organizational superpower, I know that mastering these techniques has had a huge impact on your personal and professional growth, which is how you've grown your business and your consulting business and become a leader and written a book and all the things you've done. But what does it look like when an entire organization adopts the ask approach? And can you provide an example of a company that you either successfully have worked with that's adopted this and there's been a shift?
Yeah. When a company or any kind of organization really builds this as a team and organization level superpower, what happens is the collective genius in and around that organization emerges. All of a sudden, the ideas, the insights, the feedback come from all directions. It's not just the leaders who have the answers and who know what's best, but really that insight is springing forth from all over the place. And in the book, I talk about various different examples. There's organizations like Glossier, which is a cosmetics organization that is well known for harnessing the insights of its own customers. And so they do a lot of asking and listening to customers all the way to the point where customers help to co-develop new products. And customers are even on their own internal Slack and messaging channels having dialogues about what do we think about this product. I mean, they talk about really harnessing that. There's also examples, from the book, I also interviewed people at Google who are often building products even for their own employees and are doing incredibly thoughtful, ethnographic kind of listening, observing, researching, asking their own people what's working, what's not working, and really building that in a very fast cycle way back into the products. In the Transcend, the organization that I co-lead, we have a thing where we do 2x2s. So every few months, people who work with each other say to each other, what's 2 things I can do well and what's 2 things I can do better? And all of a sudden, incredible ideas and learning come out of that if you had not asked those questions, might just be like building up cobwebs in the closet. But because we clear that out every few months, where people are contributing to each other's growth and development all over the place.
It's very well said, Jeff. And I think we're living in a world right now where the trajectory of our growth as a society to assimilate information and assimilate knowledge and create wisdom from that knowledge is a really interesting trajectory. And I'm going to ask you about this because with the rise of AI and other technologies, not just AI, robotics, AI, whatever, how do you see the role of the human connection and the ask approach evolving in the future? Because I've been to recent shows where there's a robot there and you ask her a question or him, and you get to hear an answer from AI from what they did, and it's fascinating. The first one that ever did that I saw on the internet on YouTube was Tony Robbins. And there was a girl that he did a full-on interview with who had been programmed, right? So where do you think this is headed, and how can AI not be, how can it be our companion?
Yes.
Versus it being any kind of resistance to it? Because to me, I believe it's a huge companion.
I totally agree. And I think for many skills that human beings are currently being paid for, it's not only a companion, it's a competitor. And it will take away, I mean, just take computer coding as one example. We used to think that if kids could learn how to code, they would be on a path to a middle-class wage. Well, that is, ChatGPT and other AI bots can do most of that coding right now. They can find bugs faster and fix those bugs faster than anything else. So it will compete with a lot of things that humans can do. But one thing I think it will never compete with is our ability to really connect with one another, to really learn from each other, to really understand what one another's experiences are. But I have found that it can be an amazing companion for that. And so, for example, if you put into whatever your favorite AI bot is, if you put in something you feel really worked up about, really righteous, maybe it's about a political candidate, you say, why would anyone ever vote for this person and elect them? How could they, and then you finish by saying, what might I be missing? You just put that phrase in at the end. All of a sudden, it can help you become more curious. It can help you see, actually, here are 5 or 6 things you might be missing. And here's why the people who vote for that person might actually not be crazy. And here's what you might not be thinking about. And so it can actually be a companion that helps us to choose curiosity. Similarly, you can then say, I've done this in disputes that I've had with someone at work, with my wife. I say, here's the situation. What are 6 questions I could be asking the other person? All of a sudden, it generates a whole set of questions. Maybe not all 6 are perfect, but 4 or 5 of them are things I never thought of to ask before. So all of a sudden, it can actually help us to pose better questions if we put it to work for that. And then sometimes it can help us listen better. So, I have fed a transcript of a conversation back into AI, and I've said, what are the most important points you hear this person making? What are the most important emotions you hear them expressing? What are the most important actions you see them taking? And all of a sudden, fascinating things come up.
And it's, what's curious about what you just said is the fact, if you think about the prompt that you just asked, meaning Jeff Wetzler, you say you asked the AI to give you the most important points based on its learning, not your learning.
Yeah.
And it actually helped you to really see something that you may not have seen. And this book is going to help people see what they haven't seen, the unseen. I call it the tip of the iceberg. Well, let's go under the iceberg. It's really about asking questions, and it's about getting at the ask approach. Jeff, it's been an honor having you on Inside Personal Growth and sharing your wisdom and experience from years of not only your background in psychology, but your background in business, how you've applied that and put that together to help people better work together in teams and leadership and to become better at what they do. It's really an honor to have you on my show.
Thank you, Greg. I've learned a lot from this conversation. Just really, really fun to be in dialogue with you. So thanks for having me.
Jeff Wetzler, thanks so much for being on Inside Personal Growth. Go out and get the book. We'll have a link. It's called Ask, and the subtitle is Tap into the Hidden Wisdom of the People Around You for Unexpected Breakthroughs in Leadership and Life. Pleasure. Thanks.
Great to be with you, Greg.
Thank you for listening to this podcast on Inside Personal Growth. We appreciate your support. And for more information about new podcasts, please go to InsidePersonalGrowth.com or any of your favorite channels to listen to our podcast. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.